Hello and welcome back to the Reading Corner. I'm your host, Renee. And if you haven't been here before, welcome. Please hit the like, subscribe button. Share me with all your friends and family. I post stories that I read in the public domain for your enjoyment every Wednesday. And on the middle of every month, I post short stories that I've written myself. And coming soon on, hopefully, the 30th or the end of each month, I'll be uploading a D&D game that I'm running for your enjoyment. So without further ado, let's get into it. We are reading short stories currently from Hans Christen Anderson. If you were here last week, you know that I've already read the first 4 stories. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first short story is titled Little Ida's Flowers, and it was written in 1835. My poor flowers are quite dead, said little Ida. They were so pretty last evening, but now every leaf has withered and drooped. Why do they do that? She asked the student who sat on the sofa. She was very fond of him, because he told such good stories and could cut such amusing figures out of paper hearts with dancing ladies inside them, flowers of all sorts, and castles with doors that you could open and close. He was a rollicking fellow. Why do my flowers look so ill today? She asked him again, and showed him her withered bouquet. Don't you know what's the matter with them? The student said. They were at the ball last night. That's why they can scarcely hold up their heads. Flowers can't dance, said little Ida. Oh, indeed they can, said the student. As soon as it gets dark and we go to sleep, they frolic about in a fine fashion. Almost every night they give a ball. Can't children go to the ball? Oh, little daisies can go, and so can lilies of the valley. Where do the prettiest flowers dance? Ida asked. Haven't you often visited the beautiful flower garden just outside of town, around the castle where the king lives in the summertime? You remember, the place where swans swim close when you offer them breadcrumbs. Believe me, that's where the prettiest flowers dance. Yesterday I was there with my mother, said Ida, but there wasn't a leaf on the trees or a flower left. Where are they? Last summer I saw ever so many. They are inside the castle, of course, said the student. Confidently, just as soon as the king comes back to town with all of his court, the flowers run from the garden into the castle to enjoy themselves. You should see them. The 2 loveliest roses climb up on the throne where they are the king and the queen. All the red coxcombs line up on either side to stand and bow like grooms of the bedchamber. Then all the best-dressed flowers come, and the grand ball starts. The blue violets are the naval cadets. Their partners, whom they call Miss, are hyacinths and crocuses. The tulips and tiger lilies are the old chaperones who see to it that the dancing is done well and that everyone behaves properly. But, said little Ida, doesn't anybody punish the flowers for dancing in the king's own castle? Nobody knows a thing about it, said the student. To be sure, there's the old castle keeper who is there to watch over things. Sometimes he comes in the night with his enormous bunch of keys, but as soon as the flower hear the keys jangle, they keep quiet and hide, with only their heads peeking out from behind the curtains. Then the old castle keeper says, I smell flowers in here, but he can't see any. Oh, what fun! Little Ida clapped her hands. But couldn't I see the flowers either? Oh, easily, said the student. The very next time you go there, remember to peep in the windows. There you will see them, as I did today. A tall, yellow lily lay stretched on the sofa, pretending to be a lady in waiting. Can the flowers who live in the botanical gardens visit the castle? Can they go that far? Oh, why, certainly. They can fly all the way if it suits them. Haven't you seen lovely butterflies? White, yellow, and red ones? They almost look like flowers, and that is really what they used to be. They are flowers who have jumped up off their stems high into the air. They beat the air with their petals as though these were the little wings, and so they manage to fly. If they behave themselves nicely, they get permission to fly all day long, instead of having to go home and sit on their stems. In time, their petals turn into real wings. You've seen them yourself. However, it's quite possible that the botanical garden flowers have never been to the king's castle and don't know anything about the fun that goes on there almost every night. Therefore, I'll tell you how to arrange a surprise for the botanical professor. You know the one I mean. He lives quite near here. Well, the next time you go to the garden, you tell one of his flowers that they're having a great ball inside the castle. One flower will tell the other, and off they'll fly. When the professor comes out into the garden, not one flower will he find, and where they've all gone, he'll never be able to guess. How can a flower tell the others? You know flowers can't speak. They can't speak, the student agreed, but they can signal. Haven't you noticed that whenever the breeze blows, the flowers nod to one another and make signs with their leaves? Why, it's as plain as talk. Can the professor understand their signs? Certainly he can. One morning he came into his garden and saw a big stinging nettle leaf, signaling to a glorious red carnation. You are so beautiful, and I love you so much. But the professor didn't like that kind of thing, so he slapped the nettle's leaves, for they are its fingers. He was stung so badly that he hasn't laid hands on a stinging nettle since. Oh, how jolly, little Ida laughed. How can anyone stuff a child's head with such nonsense? Said the prosy counselor, who had come to call and sit on the sofa too. He didn't like the student a bit. He always grumbled when he saw the student cut out those strange, amusing pictures. Sometimes a man hanging from the gallows and holding a heart in his hand to show that he had stolen many people's hearts away. Sometimes an old witch riding a broomstick and balancing her husband on her nose. The counselor highly disapproved of those, and he would say as he said now, How can anyone stuff a child's head with such nonsense, such stupid fantasy? But to little Ida, what the student told her about flowers was marvelously amusing, and she kept right on thinking about it. Her flowers couldn't hold their heads up because they were tired out from dancing all night. Why, they must be ill. She took them to where she kept her toys, on a nice little table, with a whole drawer full of pretty things. Her doll, Sophie, lay asleep in the doll's bed, but little Ida told her, Sophie, you'll really have to get up and be satisfied to sleep in the drawer tonight, because my poor flowers are ill. Maybe if I let them sleep in your bed tonight, they will be well again. When she took the doll up, Sophie looked as cross as could be, and didn't say a word. She was sulky because she couldn't keep her own bed. Ida put the flowers to bed and tucked the little covers around them. She told them to be good and to lie still, while she made them some tea, so that they would get well and be up and about tomorrow. She carefully drew the curtains around the little bed, so the morning sun would not shine in their faces. All evening long she kept thinking of what the student had said, before she climbed into bed herself. She peeped through the window curtains at the fine potted plants that belonged to her mother, hyacinths and tulips too. She whispered very softly, I know you're going to the ball tonight. But the flowers pretended not to understand her. They didn't move a leaf, but little Ida knew all about them. After she was in bed, she lay there for a long while, thinking how pleasant it must be to see the flowers dance in the king's castle. Were my flowers really there? She wondered. Then she fell asleep. When she woke up again in the night, she had been dreaming of the flowers, and of the student, and of the prosy counselor who had scolded him and had said it was all silly nonsense. It was very still in the bedroom where Ida was. The night lamp glowed on the table, and Ida's mother and father were asleep. "Are my flowers still asleep in Sophie's bed?" Ida wondered. "That's what I'd like to know." She lifted herself a little higher on her pillow and looked toward the door that stood half open. In there were her flowers and all her toys. She listened, and it seemed to her that someone was playing the piano, very softly and more beautifully than she had ever heard it played. "I'm perfectly sure that those flowers are all dancing," she said to herself. "Oh my goodness, wouldn't I love to see them?" But she did not dare get up, because that might awaken her father and mother. "I do wish the flowers would come in here," she thought, but they didn't. The music kept playing, and it sounded so lovely that she couldn't stay in bed another minute. She tiptoed to the door and peeped into the next room. Oh, how funny! What a sight she saw there! No night lamp burned in the next room, but it was well lighted just the same. The moonlight streamed through the window upon the middle of the floor, and it was almost as bright as day. The hyacinths and the tulips lined up in 2 long rows across the floor. No one was left by the window. The flower pots stood there empty, while the flowers danced gracefully about the room, making a complete chain and holding each other by their long green leaves as they swung around. At the piano sat a tall yellow lily. Little Ida remembered it from last summer because the student had said, "Doesn't that lily look just like Miss Line?" Everyone had laughed at the time, but now little Ida noticed that there was a most striking resemblance. When the lily played, it had the very same mannerisms as the young lady, sometimes bending its long yellow face to one side, sometimes to the other, and nodding in time with the lovely music. No one suspected that little Ida was there. She saw a nimble blue crocus jump up on the table where her toys were, go straight to the doll's bed, and throw back the curtains. The sick flowers lay there, but they got up all at once, and nodded down to the others that they also wanted to dance. The old chimney sweep doll, whose lower lip was broken, rose and made a bow to the pretty flowers. They looked quite themselves again as they jumped down to join the others and have a good time. It seemed as if something clattered off the table. Little Ida looked and saw that the birch wand that had been left over from Mardi Gras time was jumping down as if he thought he were a flower too. The wand did cut quite a flowery figure with his paper rosettes, and, to top him off, a little wax figure who had a broad-trimmed hat, just like the one that the counselor wore. The wand skipped about on his 3 red wooden legs and stamped them as hard as he could, for he was dancing the mazurka. The flowers could not dance it because they were too light to stamp as he did. All of a sudden, the wax figure grew tall and important. He whirled around to the paper flowers beside him and said, "How can anyone stuff a child's head with such nonsense, such stupid fantasy?" At that moment, he was a perfect image of the big-hatted counselor, just as sallow and quite as cross. But the paper flowers hit back. They struck his thin shanks until he crumpled up into a very small wax mannequin. The change was so ridiculous that little Ida could not keep from laughing. Wherever the sceptred wand danced, the counselor had to dance too, whether he made himself tall and important or remained a little wax figure in a big black hat. The real flowers put in a kind word for him, especially those who had lain ill in the doll's bed, and the birch wand let him rest. Just then they heard a loud knocking in the drawer where Ida's doll, Sophie, lay with the other toys. The chimney sweep rushed to the edge of the table, lay flat on his stomach, and managed to pull the drawer out a little way. Sophie sat up and looked around her most surprised. "Why, they are having a ball," she said. "Why hasn't somebody told me about it?" "Won't you dance with me?" the chimney sweep asked her. "A fine partner you'd be," she said, and turned her back on him. She sat on the edge of the drawer, hoping one of the flowers would ask her to dance, but none of them did. She coughed. Ahem! And still not one of them asked her. To make matters worse, the chimney sweep had gone off dancing by himself, which he did pretty well. As none of the flowers paid the least attention to Sophie, she let herself tumble from the drawer to the floor with a bang. Now the flowers all came running to ask, "Did you hurt yourself?" They were very polite to her, especially those who had slept in her bed, but she wasn't hurt a bit. Ida's flowers thanked her for the use of her nice bed and treated her well. They took her out in the middle of the floor where the moon shone and danced with her while all the other flowers made a circle around them. Sophie wasn't at all cross now. She said they might keep her bed. She didn't in the least mind sleeping in the drawer. But the flowers said, "Thank you, no. We can't live long enough to keep your bed. Tomorrow we shall be dead. Tell little Ida to bury us in the garden next to her canary bird's grave. Then we shall come up again next summer, more beautiful than ever." "Oh, you mustn't die," Sophie said, and kissed all the flowers. Then the drawing-room door opened, and many more splendid flowers tripped in. Ida couldn't imagine where they had come from, why, they must have come straight from the king's castle. First came 2 magnificent roses, wearing little gold crowns. These were the king and queen. Then came charming gillyflowers and carnations, who greeted everybody. They brought the musicians along. Large poppies and peonies blew upon pea pods until they were red in the face. Blue hyacinths and little snowdrops tinkled their bells. It was such funny music. Many other flowers followed them, and they all danced together. Blue violets with pink primroses and daisies with lilies of the valley. All the flowers kissed one another, and that was very pretty to look at. When the time came to say good night, little Ida sneaked back to bed too, where she dreamt of all she had seen. As soon as it was morning, she hurried to her little table to see if her flowers were still there. She threw back the curtain around the bed. Yes, they were there, but they were even more faded than yesterday. Sophie was lying in the drawer where Ida had put her. She looked quite sleepy. "Do you remember what you were to tell me?" little Ida asked. But Sophie just looked stupid and didn't say one word. "You're no good at all," Ida told her, "and to think how nice they were to you and how all of them danced with you." She opened a little pasteboard box nicely decorated with pictures of birds and laid the dead flowers in it. "This will be your pretty coffin," she told them. "When my cousins from Norway come to visit us, they will help me bury you in the garden, so that you may come up again next summer and be even more beautiful than ever." Her Norwegian cousins were 2 pleasant boys named Jonas and Adolf. Their father had given them 2 new crossbows, which they brought with them for Ida to see. She told them how her poor flowers had died, and they got permission to hold a funeral. The boys marched first with their crossbows on their shoulders. Little Ida followed with her dead flowers in their nice box. In the garden they dug a little grave. Ida first kissed the flowers, and then she closed the box and laid it in the earth. Adolf and Jonas shot their crossbows over the grave, for they had no guns or cannons. The end. The next story is titled Thumbelina, written in 1835. There once was a woman who wanted so very much to have a tiny little child, but she did not know where to find one. So she went to an old witch, and she said, "I have set my heart upon having a tiny little child. Please, could you tell me where I could find one?" "Why, that's easily done," said the witch. "Here's a grain of barley for you, but it isn't at all the sort of barley that farmers grow in their fields, or that the chickens get to eat. Put it in a flower pot, and you'll see what you shall see." "Oh, thank you," the woman said. She gave the witch 12 pennies and planted the barley seed as soon as she got home. It quickly grew into a fine large flower, which looked very much like a tulip, but the petals were folded tight, as though it were still a bud. "This is such a pretty flower," said the woman. She kissed its lovely red and yellow petals, and just as she kissed it, the flower gave a loud pop and flew open. It was a tulip, right enough, but on the green cushion in the middle of it sat a tiny girl. She was dainty and fair to see, but she was no taller than your thumb, so she was called Thumbelina. A nicely polished walnut shell served as her cradle. Her mattress was made of the blue petals of violets, and a rose petal was pulled up to cover her. That was how she slept at night. In the daytime, she played on a table, where the woman put a plate surrounded with a wreath of flowers. Their stems lay in the water, on which there floated a large tulip petal. Thumbelina used the petal as a boat, and with a pair of white horsehairs for oars, she could row clear across the plate. A charming sight. She could sing, too. Her voice was the softest and sweetest that anyone ever had heard. One night, as she lay in her cradle, a horrible toad hopped in through the window. One of the panes was broken. This big, ugly, slimy toad jumped right down on the table where Thumbelina was asleep under the red rose petal. "Here's a perfect wife for my son," the toad exclaimed. She seized upon the walnut shell in which Thumbelina lay asleep, and hopped off with it out the window and into the garden. A big, broad stream ran through it, with a muddy marsh along its banks, and here the toad lived with her son. Ugh! He was just like his mother, slimy and horrible. "Coax, coax, brag, ag," was all that he could say when he saw the graceful little girl in the walnut shell. "Don't speak so loud, or you'll wake her up," the old toad told him. "She might get away from us yet, for she is as light as a puff of swan's down. We must put her on one of the broad water lily leaves out in the stream. She is so small and light that it will just be like an island to her, and she can't run away from us while we are making our best room under the mud ready for you two to live in." Many water lilies with broad green leaves grew in the stream, and it looked as if they were floating on the surface. The leaf that lay furthest from the bank was the largest of them all, and it was to this leaf that the old toad swam with the walnut shell that held Thumbelina. The poor little thing woke up early the next morning, and when she saw where she was, she began to cry bitterly. There was water all around the big green leaf, and there was no way at all for her to reach the shore. The old toad sat in the mud, decorating a room with big green rushes and yellow water lilies to have it looking its best for her new daughter-in-law. Then she and her ugly son swam out to the leaf on which Thumbelina was standing. They came for her pretty little bed, which they wanted to carry to the bridal chamber before they took her there. The old toad curtsied deeply in the water before her and said, "Meet my son. He is to be your husband, and you will share a delightful home in the mud." "Coax, coax, brag, ag," was all her son could say. Then they took the pretty little bed and swam away with it. Left all alone on the green leaf, Thumbelina sat down and cried. She did not want to live in the slimy toad's house, and she didn't want to have the toad's horrible son for her husband. The little fishes who swam in the water beneath her had seen the toad and heard what she had said, so up popped their heads to have a look at the little girl. No sooner had they seen her than they felt very sorry that anyone so pretty should have to go down to live with that hideous toad. No, that should never be. They gathered around the green stem that held the leaf where she was, and gnawed it in two with their teeth. Away went the leaf down the stream, and away went Thumbelina, far away where the toad could not catch her. Thumbelina sailed past many a place, and when the little birds in the bushes saw her, they sang, "What a darling little girl!" The leaf drifted further and further away with her, and so it was that Thumbelina became a traveler. A lovely white butterfly kept fluttering around her, and at last alighted on the leaf, because he admired Thumbelina. She was a happy little girl again, now that the toad could not catch her. It was all very lovely as she floated along, and where the sun struck the water it looked like shining gold. Thumbelina undid her sash, tied one end of it to the butterfly, and made the other end fast to the leaf. It went much faster now, and Thumbelina went much faster too, for of course she was standing on it. Just then a big May-bug flew by and caught sight of her. Immediately he fastened his claws around her slender waist and flew with her up into a tree. Away went the green leaf down the stream, and away went the butterfly with it, for he was tied to the leaf and could not get loose. My goodness, how frightened little Thumbelina was when the May-bug carried her up in the tree, but she was even more sorry for the nice white butterfly that she had fastened to the leaf, because if he couldn't free himself he would have to starve to death. But the May-bug wasn't one to care about that. He sat her down on the largest green leaf of the tree, fed her honey from the flowers, and told her how pretty she was, considering that she didn't look the least like a May-bug. After a while, all the other May-bugs who lived in the tree came to pay them a call. As they stared at Thumbelina, the lady May-bugs threw up their feelers and said, "Why, she only has 2 legs. What a miserable sight!" "She hasn't any feelers," one cried. "She is pinched in at the waist. How shameful! She looks like a human being. Oh, how ugly she is," said all of the female May-bugs. Yet Thumbelina was as pretty as ever. Even the May-bug who had flown away with her knew that. But as every last one of them kept calling her ugly, he at length came to agree with them, and would have nothing to do with her. She could go wherever she chose. They flew down out of the tree with her and left her on a daisy, where she sat and cried because she was so ugly that the May-bugs wouldn't have anything to do with her. Nevertheless, she was the loveliest little girl you can imagine, and as frail and fine as the petal of a rose. All summer long, poor Thumbelina lived all alone in the woods. She wove herself a hammock of grass and hung it under a big burdock leaf to keep off the rain. She took honey from the flowers for food and drank the dew that she found on the leaves every morning. In this way the summer and fall went by. Then came the winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung so sweetly for her flew away. The trees and the flowers withered. The big burdock leaf under which she had lived shriveled up until nothing was left of it but a dry yellow stalk. She was terribly cold, for her clothes had worn threadbare, and she herself was so slender and frail. Poor Thumbelina, she would freeze to death. Snow began to fall, and every time a snowflake struck her, it was as if she had been hit by a whole shovelful. For we are quite tall, while she measured only an inch. She wrapped the withered leaf about her, but there was no warmth in it. She shivered with cold. Near the edge of the woods, where she now had arrived, was a large grain field, but the grain had been harvested long ago. Only the dry, bare stubble stuck out of the frozen ground. It was just as if she were lost in a vast forest, and oh, how she shivered with cold. Then she came to the door of a field mouse, who had a little hole amid the stubble. There this mouse lived, warm and cozy, with a whole storeroom of grain, and a magnificent kitchen and pantry. Poor Thumbelina stood at the door, just like a beggar child, and pled for a little bit of barley, because she hadn't had anything to eat for 2 days past. "Why, you poor little thing," said the field mouse, who turned out to be a kind-hearted old creature. "You must come into my house. You must come into my warm room and share my dinner." She took such a fancy to Thumbelina that she said, "If you care to, you may stay with me for all of winter, but you must keep my room tidy and tell me stories, for I am very fond of them." Thumbelina did as the kind old field mouse asked, and she had a very good time of it. "Soon we shall have a visitor," the field mouse said. "Once every week my neighbour comes to see me, and he is even better off than I am. His rooms are large, and he wears such a beautiful black velvet coat. If you could only get him for a husband, you'd be well taken care of. But he can't see anything. You must tell him the very best stories you know." Thumbelina did not like this suggestion. She would not even consider the neighbour because he was a mole. He paid them a visit in his black velvet coat. The field mouse talked about how wealthy and wise he was, and how his home was more than 20 times larger than hers. But for all of his knowledge, he cared nothing at all for the sun and the flowers. He had nothing good to say for them, and had never laid eyes on them. As Thumbelina had to sing for him, she sang Maybugs, Maybug, Fly Away Home, and The Monk Goes Afield. The mole fell in love with her sweet voice, but he didn't say anything about it yet, for he was a most discreet fellow. He had just dug a long tunnel through the ground from his house to theirs, and the field mouse and Thumbelina were invited to use it whenever they pleased, though he warned them not to be alarmed by the dead bird that lay in this passage. It was a complete bird, with feather and beak. It must have died quite recently, when winter set in, and it was buried right in the middle of the tunnel. The mole took in his mouth a torch of decayed wood. In the darkness it glimmered like fire. He went ahead of them to light the way through the long, dark passage. When they came to where the dead bird lay, the mole put his broad nose to the ceiling, and made a large hole through which daylight could fall. In the middle of the floor lay a dead swallow, with his lovely wings folded at his sides and his head tucked under his feathers. The poor bird must certainly have died of the cold. Thumbelina felt so sorry for him. She loved all the little birds who had sung and sweetly twittered to her all through the summer. But the mole gave the body a kick with his short stumps and said, "Now he won't be chirping any more. What a wretched thing it is to be born a bird. Thank goodness none of my children can be a bird, who has nothing but his chirp chirp and must starve to death when winter comes along." "Yes, you're so right, you sensible man," the field mouse agreed. "What good is all his chirp chirping to a bird in the winter time when he starves and freezes? But that's considered very grand, I imagine." Thumbelina kept silent, but when the others turned their backs on the bird, she bent over, smoothed aside the feathers that hid the bird's head, and kissed his closed eyes. "Maybe it was he who sang so sweetly to me in the summertime," she thought to herself. "What pleasures he gave me, that dear pretty bird." The mole closed up the hole that let in the daylight, and then he took the ladies home. That night Thumbelina could not sleep a wink, so she got up and wove a fine large coverlet out of hay. She took it to the dead bird and spread it over him so that he would lie warm in the cold earth. She tucked him in with some soft thistledown that she had found in the field mouse's room. "Goodbye, you pretty little bird," she said. "Goodbye, and thank you for your sweet songs last summer when the trees were all green and the sun shone so warmly upon us." She laid her head on his breast, and it startled her to feel a soft thump, as if something was beating inside. This was the bird's heart. He was not dead, he was only numb with cold, and now that he had been warmed, he came to life again. In the fall, all swallows fly off to warm countries, but if one of them starts too late, he gets so cold that he drops down as if he were dead and lies where he fell, and then the cold snow covers him. Thumbelina was so frightened that she trembled, for the bird was so big, so enormous compared to her own inch of height. But she mustered her courage, tucked the cotton wool down closer around the poor bird, brought the mint leaf that covered her own bed, and spread it over the bird's head. The following night she tiptoed out to him again. He was alive now, but so weak that he could barely open his eyes for a moment to look at Thumbelina, who stood beside him with the piece of touchwood that was her only lantern. "Thank you, pretty little child," the sick swallow said. "I have been wonderfully warmed. Soon I shall get strong once more and be able to fly again in the warm sunshine." "Oh," she said, "it's cold outside. It's snowing and freezing. You just stay in your warm bed and I'll nurse you." Then she brought him some water in the petal of a flower. The swallow drank and told her how he had hurt one of his wings in a thorn bush, and for that reason couldn't fly as fast as the other swallows when they flew far, far away to the warm country. Finally, he had dropped to the ground. That was all he remembered, and he had no idea how he came to be where she found him. The swallow stayed there all through the winter, and Thumbelina was kind to him and tended him with loving care. She didn't say anything about this to the field mouse or to the mole, because they did not like the poor unfortunate swallow. As soon as spring came and the sun warmed the earth, the swallow told Thumbelina that it was time to say goodbye. She reopened the hole that the mole had made in the ceiling, and the sun shone in splendor upon them. The swallow asked Thumbelina to go with him, She could sit on his back as they flew away through the green woods. But Thumbelina knew that it would make the old field mouse feel badly if she left like that, so she said, "No, I cannot go." "Fare you well, my good and pretty girl," said the swallow, as he flew into the sunshine. Tears came into Thumbelina's eyes as she watched him go, for she was so fond of the poor swallow. "Chirp, chirp," sang the bird as he flew into the green woods. Thumbelina felt very downcast. She was not permitted to go in the warm sunshine. Moreover, the grain that was sown in the field above the field mouse's house grew so tall that to a poor little girl who was only an inch high, it was like a dense forest. "You must work on your trousseau this summer," the field mouse said, for their neighbour, that loathsome mole in his black velvet coat, had proposed to her. "You must have both woolens and linens, both bedding and wardrobe, when you become the mole's wife." Thumbelina had to turn the spindle, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders to spin and weave for her day and night. The mole came to call every evening, and his favourite remark was that the sun, which now baked the earth as hard as a rock, would not be nearly so hot when summer was over. Yes, as soon as summer was past, he would be marrying Thumbelina. But she was not at all happy about it, because she didn't like the tedious mole the least bit. Every morning at sunrise and every evening at sunset, she would steal out the door. When the breeze blew the ears of grains apart, she could catch glimpses of the blue sky. She could dream about how bright and fair it was out of doors, and how she wished she would see her dear swallow again. But he did not come back, for doubtless he was far away, flying about in the lovely green woods. When fall arrived, Thumbelina's whole trousseau was ready. "Your wedding day is 4 weeks off," the field mouse told her. But Thumbelina cried and declared that she would not have a tedious mole for a husband. "Fiddlesticks," said the field mouse. "Don't you be obstinate, or I'll bite you with my white teeth. Why, you're getting a superb husband. The Queen herself hasn't had a black velvet coat as fine as his. Both his kitchen and his cellar are well supplied. You ought to thank goodness that you're getting him." Then came the wedding day. The mole had come to take Thumbelina home with him, where she would have to live deep underground and never go out in the warm sunshine again, because he disliked it so. The poor little girl felt very sad that she had to say goodbye to the glorious sun, which the field mouse had at least let her look out at through the doorway. "Farewell, bright sun," she said. With her arm stretched toward it, she walked a little way away from the field mouse's home. The grain had been harvested, and only the dry stubble was left in the field. "Farewell, farewell," she cried again, and flung her little arms around a small red flower that was still in bloom. "If you see my dear little swallow, please give him my love." "Chirp, chirp, chirp, chirp," she suddenly heard a twittering over her head. She looked up, and there was the swallow just passing by. He was so glad to see Thumbelina, although when she told him how she hated to marry the mole and live deep underground where the sun never shone, she could not hold back her tears. "Now that the cold winter is coming," the swallow told her, "I shall fly far, far away to the warm countries. Won't you come along with me? You can ride on my back. Just tie yourself on with your sash, and away we'll fly, far away from the ugly mole and his dark hole, far, far away over the mountains to the warm countries where the sun shines so much fairer than here, to where it is always summer, and there are always flowers. Please fly away with me, dear little Thumbelina, you who saved my life when I lay frozen in a dark hole in the earth." "Yes, I will go with you," said Thumbelina. She sat on his back, put her feet on his outstretched wings, and fastened her sash to one of his strongest feathers. Then the swallow soared into the air over forests and over lakes, high up over the great mountains that are always capped with snow. When Thumbelina felt cold in the chill air, she crept under the bird's warm feathers, with only her little head stuck out to watch all the wonderful sights below. At length they came to the warm countries. There the sun shone far more brightly than it ever does here, and the sky seemed twice as high. Along the ditches and hedgerows grew marvellous green and blue grapes. Lemons and oranges hung in the woods. The air smelled sweetly of myrtle and thyme. By the wayside the loveliest children ran hither and thither, playing with brightly coloured butterflies. But the swallow flew on further still, and it became more and more beautiful. Under magnificent green trees, on the shore of a blue lake, there stood an ancient palace of dazzling white marble. The lofty pillars were wreathed with vines, and at the top of them many swallows had made their nests. One nest belonged to the swallow who carried Thumbelina. "This is my home," the swallow told her. "If you will choose one of these glorious flowers in bloom down below, I shall place you in it, and you will have all that your heart desires." "That will be lovely," she cried, and clapped her tiny hands. A great white marble pillar had fallen to the ground, where it lay in 3 broken pieces. Between these pieces grew the loveliest large white flowers. The swallow flew down with Thumbelina and put her on one of the large petals. How surprised she was to find in the center of the flower a little man, as shining and transparent as if he had been made of glass. On his head was the daintiest of little gold crowns, on his shoulders were the brightest shining wings, and he was not a bit bigger than Thumbelina. He was the spirit of the flower. In every flower there lived a small man or woman just like him, but he was the king over all of them. "Oh, isn't he handsome?" Thumbelina said softly to the swallow. The king was somewhat afraid of the swallow, which seemed a very giant of a bird to anyone as small as he. But when he saw Thumbelina, he rejoiced, for she was the prettiest little girl he had ever laid eyes on. So he took off his golden crown and put it on her head. He asked if he might know her name, and he asked her to be his wife, which would make her queen over all the flowers. Here, indeed, was a different sort of husband from the toad's son and the mole with his black velvet coat. So she said yes to this charming king. From all the flowers trooped little ladies and gentlemen, delightful to behold. Every one of them brought Thumbelina a present, but the best gift of all was a pair of wings that had belonged to a large silver fly. When these were made fast to her back, she too could flit from flower to flower. Everyone rejoiced as the swallow perched above them in his nest and sang his very best songs for them. He was sad, though, deep down in his heart, for he liked Thumbelina so much that he had never wanted to part with her. "You shall no longer be called Thumbelina," the flower spirit told her. "That name is too ugly for anyone as pretty as you are. We shall call you Maya." "Goodbye, goodbye," said the swallow. He flew away again from the warm country, back to faraway Denmark, where he had a little nest over the window of the man who can tell you fairy tales. To him the bird sang, "Chirp, chirp, chirp, chirp." And that is how we heard the whole story. The end. And that's it for today's session of the Reading Corner. Join me next time for more short stories from Hans Christen Anderson, and as always, give that video a like, a subscribe. I also post my stories on Patreon, so if you prefer to watch or engage with my content there, head over there. As always, I'll be seeing you. Bye!